So you're looking at getting into wood turning in 2026. Well, this is the right video. We're going to be going over the lathe you should be getting as a beginner, the tools that I recommend, the project I recommend starting with, and the materials I recommend using. All of this stuff comes from a recommendation of wood turning for about 5 years now. I've turned hundreds, maybe even thousands of pens, and I just want to share a little bit of knowledge on this craft. And with all that being said, hey guys, I'm Jake and this is Albie, and welcome back to my channel. Let's get right into what we're going to be doing. So we're here to learn about lathe turning and turning projects. Now, what project do I recommend? I did allude to it a little bit in the start with pen turning or mandrel turning, because there's a lot of different things you can make on mandrels that aren't pens. Things like perfume atomizers and stuff like that. But I think pen turning is not only a very cheap way to get into it, especially since when you buy a lathe, there's a lot of accessories that you also have to buy that make it relatively expensive. So, this is my lathe, but this is not the lathe I started with. I started with a little record bench lathe that was about yay big. It was a manual speed variation, so I had to change the belts on it. Now I've upgraded to a digital variable speed lathe, which is very nice because of the amount of turning that I do use it for. If you're just starting out or if you're going to markets, a benchtop lathe is well more than enough. You can do a whole lot with it, and a lot of lathe turning is more about your skill than about the tools that you have. Now, is there areas where you should buy more expensive tools because they will maintain an edge longer or they just feel nicer in your hand? Yes, and that is totally up to your discretion as a turner. There are also some tools that you can spend that little bit less money on and still get the same results. You might just have to be buying stuff more and more. That's why I always go with the thing of spend the money once and it'll really pay off in the long run. So let's start with the tools that you're gonna need for lathe turning. Okay, so you kind of have a magnitude of tools when you start with, because you can buy very specialty tools for a lot of things. For example, the mandrel, which is the main tool that we're gonna be using today, is basically just a rod between some centers that you can stick something on that has a hole drilled through it and basically be able to turn it into any shape or any dimension using what are called bushings, which are basically just little round metal dowel type things. Now you also have things like chucks. They come in very different types. There's different key types, there's different jaws. You could do a whole video on chucks and what different jaws are for what different purposes and all that type of stuff. Mainly in this video, it's going to be used just for drilling a center hole, but you don't necessarily need it. You can get around it if you can drill very straight holes on a drill or you have a drill press. Probably the biggest thing is when you buy a lathe, it'll come with a couple centers, which there's like spur centers, there's live centers, and basically they just do different things to help turn what's called turning between centers. That's when you are doing things like roughing out the outside of a bowl, you're turning spindles, and you're doing various things that don't require a specialty thing like a mandrel. The last big thing for mandrel turning is, it's called a drill chuck or a drill center. This also goes in the tailstock, but this doesn't move because you're basically drilling straight through something on the headstock of the lathe. This is how I drill all my pens out because I pre-cut them to length, but I know a lot of people do use that drill press or the hand drill if they can drill straight enough. I just find it a hell of a lot easier and a hell of a lot quicker to do this because I batch out a lot of pens instead of turning one-off projects. But if you're just getting into it, turning that one-off project isn't a bad thing to just save a bit of money for the moment and wait till you're more invested into lathe turning. So they're kind of the accessories that you can kind of work around most of the time for the lathe. The next big thing are the chisels. They're like, you need them to turn on the lathe because they're the things that cut the wood. I basically laid out my first chisels. So there are a bowl gouge, a spindle gouge, a roughing gouge, a skew chisel, a round scraper, and a 3mm parting tool. This is a very wide set, and you can basically do anything in turning with this set. Do you need all of these tools to start with? No. Would I recommend buying a set at a cheaper price than buying singular ones at more expensive price? No. These are one of the things that I recommend really spending some money on, because the nicer these are, one, the longer that edge will last, and especially when you start turning things like acrylic or like harder timbers like wangi, ebony, stuff like that, you're really gonna want stuff that keeps a sharp edge, because you're not gonna wanna have to run to the sharpener every 5 minutes. I will say this chisel probably started about this much longer. So I've sharpened it over 5 years, a decent chunk, and I use this chisel the most. This is my most used chisel. I use it for bowl turning, I use it for pen turning, I use it for literally anything I can do, and basically use the other tools as accessories to this, because this is my favorite chisel to use, and this is the one I recommend starting with. If you're doing mandrel turning, the next one I would recommend doing is getting a skew chisel. Now, they are a little bit harder to use, and they are very versatile. You can use it like a scraper, and that's kind of what I use it for, basically to smooth out any curves that I couldn't get super smooth with the bowl gouge. You can also get a scraper for it, but you can do a lot more things with this compared to just a scraper. That's why I recommend getting a skew chisel instead of a scraper itself. All of these other tools are kind of pick your poison when it comes to when you buy, what you're more into doing. If you're into turning stuff from square to round, a roughing gouge. If you're parting a lot of things like bowls and spindles, a parting tool. If you're doing a lot of really tight coves and beads, a spindle gouge or a very small scraper. Or if you're just looking to do that final touch up on the inside of a bowl and you just need a really light touch, a scraper is also that type of tool. And all these tools have variations galore to them in the turning world. Like you can get even chunkier bowl gouges for when you're turning vases. There's even specialty tools for turning interior curves for things like vases or enclosed bowls. You can get different sizes of parting tools. You can get different shapes. There's so many different shapes of scrapers you can get. You can get different shapes of skew chisels. Roughing gouges are pretty much all the same, but you can get some really chunky ones if you need. Same with spindles. And you can also sharpen spindles and bowl gouges differently depending on what you need it for. So currently I have a very steep grind on this one, just because I like a steeper grind, but some people have a really shallow grind, which basically means the sharp edge that you see, instead of it being very sharp like a 45, it's very much flatter, maybe at like a 20-degree angle. That's a much more aggressive cut. This is a much more, I think, fine cut. So all of that stuff comes down to personal preference, but for this video and for these purposes, I recommend, if you are buying some good chisels, bowl gouge, skew chisel. That's all you're going to need for this project. Same with the rest of the things that you'll need for this project is a mandrel, that's a non-negotiable, and a live center. And then you can decide whether or not you want to buy a chuck for drilling out and a drill mandrel. They are kind of the more optional part of this project. These other tools are nice to have. You can have them if you want them, but I don't find any of these necessary for pen turning. Same with a chuck live center like this, but this comes in your lathe, so you don't even usually have to buy one. So that's the tools that I'm gonna use in this project. Let's get on to the material that you're gonna be needing to make this project work and function properly. Okay, so now we got the materials all out. let's take a look at what we're gonna need for this project. I'm gonna go from left to right as it goes from important to kind of less important. So, choosing your pen kit. Now, when you buy a pen kit, you need to make sure you have a mandrel, but you also need to make sure you have the bushings for it. Now, remember I said the bushings are these little metal tubes that come in it. Slimlines are the most common because there are a lot of variations of slimlines that people make. But if you get a specialty pen kit like bullet pen kits, they are also very popular. You have to make sure you just buy the bushings for them. They're a little bit extra and they'll last you, I think they usually last me about 100 pens before needing to be replaced. So this video, we're just gonna use the Fancy Slimline pencil in gold. I get all mine from Steve's Woodcraft and Pop Shed down in Victoria. I find they're the best price. They have a great variety, and they're also both really nice people when I've had issues with kits they've sent me before. So when you first start out, basically the things you want to get out of the pen kit are the two tubes, basically. Everything else can stay in the kits until later on. And I'll put the tubes with Albie, and he can watch them. Now, the next big thing that you're going to decide with your project is what material / difficulty you're going to turn with. Now, I have 4 different types. I have 3 different types of materials, 4 different types of difficulty. So you have kind of your regular timber that's relatively straight grained, it's easy to turn, easy to finish, all that type of jazz. You then have your harder timbers to turn. These are things that might be really soft or really splintery, or things that are really hard and easy to crack. For this example, I have a burl blank that I cut out. You can see there's some gnarliness in it, but the difficulty with burls is if your chisels aren't sharp, there's a chance that they're gonna catch a little bit. This goes the same as like if you're turning like bird's eye material. Because you're getting this stuff very thin, I'm talking like a millimeter thin, there's a good chance they'll crack and break. And I've probably done that to about 50 pens over the 5 years. So it's not uncommon to do, especially for your first couple of pens. So if you do break a pen on the lathe, don't feel bad about it, as it's a very common mistake that beginners make. But you can always just chop the material off and restart. That's the good part about it. The next one is acrylics. Now, a lot of people use acrylics because they come in really cool colors and swirl patterns. A lot of people use the camos, so I've personally used, there's a blue camo, a green, a white. So a lot of people use these with the different types of bullet pens, the 50 cal pens, all that type of stuff. It makes it really easy. Problem is, they're a lot harder to finish as you need to sand them up to a very high shine to make it look like there's no scratches in it. But they turn out really cool and they're gonna last forever because they're plastic. And the last one is resins. Now, I haven't been able to find many resin kits online. I know you can buy them with a mixture of timber and resin because materials like the burl will be mixed with resin quite often. But this one that I'm currently holding is just one that I had a bunch of spare resin for, so I poured it into a mold and poured a bunch of different colors in and swirled it around, and this is the effect I got. I basically put greens, purples, and blues in, and when you turn this, it's the exact same as the acrylic. It has to be sanded really high, really fine to get that good finish, and then also finishing it with something like a polish or a beeswax is the exact same as you would finish an acrylic. But instead of an acrylic, which is very chippy until you get round, the resin is a whole lot more likely to break because resin, when it's really thin, tends to be more brittle than acrylic does. So that's just that last level of difficulty, but I think you get some of the coolest things because it's all natural from the heat produced in it and the pigments all kind of meld together. And there's some really cool pen blanks that I've made out of resin. So that's kind of the materials that we're going over. I'm gonna put these three away and basically just use the easiest type for this video. This specific blank is beefwood, so when it's finished, you'll see a lot of neat little features in the timber. The next thing, finishing. Got to get some sandpaper. I use usually 2 to 3 grits. I use a 240, a 320, and a 400. That gets me through most of my timbers. And then if I go into acrylics and resins, I go and use micro sanders, and they go from like 600 up to 12,000 or something like that. So that's a whole separate thing. Not gonna get into that too much. Basically, all you need to know for this video, get a 120, you can get a 120, 240, 320, and a 400, and that'll get you through your first couple pen kits. And I recommend the turning ones, but if you just have regular hand sandpaper, you can use that. Just be careful as it gets a lot hotter or a lot quicker. These are designed to sort of dissipate the heat a little bit better. So after you drill through the timber, you're going to need to join them. There's a couple different ways. The way that a lot of pen turners will do it is with CA glue and activator. Basically, it's just the quicker way of doing it, and 99% of the time, the bond's strong enough where the kit won't come apart. Again, this is different for resins and acrylics. The other way to do it is using 5-minute epoxy or just regular epoxy. That's what you kind of have to use for resins and acrylics because the super glue doesn't have any fibers to bind into like the wood. So this video, we're going to be using just some CA glue and acrylic. That's pretty just standard. And then the finishing process. Now you can finish your pens in any way that you see fit. You can use any finishing method that you really like. The method I really like is using this Aussie Oil friction polish. It basically just gives a really nice sheen to it. And then it does have a lot of protection. You don't need to add anything after it, but I always like putting just a little bit of beeswax on it and buffing it out. I think it just gives that little bit of extra sheen and makes it just look that little bit nicer for the end product. So that's kind of what we're going to be using for that. But now we're going to actually be getting into some of the making and some of the turning of this stuff. So let's move all the stuff back into the middle and let's start talking about how I get all this ready to be put on the lathe. So the first thing that we do is we need to cut the material down to size. How I mark it out is I grab the brass tubing, I lay them both on a flat surface, I grab a marker, and then I just do a little mark at the top of the brass tubing. I flip the material over and I do another mark. As you can see, there's a whole lot of wastage in this material. I always keep the wastage because you can glue bits together and you can create really funky pens. I like how they sort of all turn out, but if you're not making them yourself, you can create quite a lot of wastage. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about throwing out material or not. So we're gonna just quickly cut this on the miter saw. You can use whatever tool you have, but basically it'll just go cut. So now we have the 3 pieces, wastage, goes in my little drawer. And then these are my 2 bits for my brass tubing. So before we get too far, I'm just going to rip a very thin strip off my sandpaper. This is what I'll use to sand the project, but also just quickly scuff up the brass tubing to allow the CA glue to bond to it a little bit. Now I'm using 320 here. It is a little bit better to use a rougher sandpaper, but it is what it is. Okay, so how do we pop it in the mandrel? So popping anything in the tailstock is as easy as shoving it in the hole. Tailstock, done. The vice chuck, however, needs to go screw onto here. Most lathes will have a little lock that you can lock it with. Currently it's unlocked, and then I flip it over, and now it's locked in place and it won't move. So it makes it really easy to spin on the lathe. There we go. And now I unlock it again. That looks pretty straight. I'm just gonna do the final check. We're gonna drill it. There's two ways to drill it. You can either push it straight through, or you can lock it down each time and wind. I always push it straight through, but again, when you're using harder materials, maybe right at the end, you're gonna have to lock it down and turn it just so you don't break through the end. Now you'll get to see me undo it on the lathe. As you can see, with it horizontally, it's a lot easier to get it on and off, and that's it drilled straight through. Let me see if you can see the light. There you go. See the light through my shirt. There we go. Now, let's chuck the other one on. So same thing, popping it in the jaw chuck, making it as square kind of as you can get it, tightening it a little bit so it holds in, and then just doing some final movements just to make sure that it's square. Looks pretty close. Yep, and tighten it down. Let's just see where it's hitting. Okay, now that we have the holes in, like I said, we're gonna glue these tubes in. Then, the best way I found to do it is put the glue around, you twist as you push in, and then right as you get to the end, you tap it down on the table and swipe. It means that one end's gonna be almost perfectly flush, making it really easy to get both sides flush for the kit. There we go. Just, if you're using a thinner CA glue, make sure you are constantly turning it so it doesn't fall off. And then swipe. And then all you do with the activator is go spray, 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 and then it'll basically instantly cure. The one thing I did forget to mention, I'm using medium CA glue. You can also use thick. Using thin is way too watery for this. So they're slightly oversized for this. Now there's two ways to solve that. You can either sand it, which is what I'm gonna do, and I use basically a tool sharpener to sand it, or you can cut it back on the miter saw. That takes a lot of guesswork, and I've cut pens short multiple times doing that. So that is basically a throw-out kit type of steak. The last option is there's a specialty tool that you can get that basically has a hole and then a little cutter on it. So you put it in a drill press or a drill, and you basically just drill down, and it cuts the material until it hits the brass tubing, and then you stop. The thing that you're looking for before you want to mount this up is basically whatever option you do, you just want to see the end of the brass tube be nice and shiny. So let's take you to the sander, because that's what I'm going to do in this video, and kind of show you what I'm meaning by that. So sander goes on, and then I'm going to do the flat edge first, just to show you what it does. So I pop it on, and I constantly turn it so that it doesn't become skewed. And then, if you can see, it now has a shine to it. That's kind of what you're looking for. There's a nice flat edge now, and that edge will be now good to go on the mandrel. This is also still with the lathe fully locked, because it just makes it a little bit easier. I put on one bushing, then the material, then another bushing, then more material, then the final bushing. Now some kits you'll only need to put in 2 bushings, some kits you might need to put in 4. Depends on the pen kit, but for most slimlines it's 3. So you give it a good tighten down, make sure that the kits don't turn. There we go, that looks pretty good. And then tailstock up to the mandrel, and then lock it down. And then very gently, because this steel rod in the mandrel can bend, and it does bend over time. Basically, all you want to do is give it a slight turn so that it's nice and stable. The way you can tell is when you turn the headstock on, this should be spinning pretty well the same speed as the mandrel. If it's not, like that, it's not attached properly. So fully attach it, and that's good. Now we're gonna get into turning.
So now that we're actually starting to turn, there's a few things that you should know. So most of the time we're going to be turning from square stock into round stock. So when you first get it spinning up, that's the first thing I recommend to do, is basically just fully making these blanks nice and round, making it as thick as you can get it, because it gives you the most freedom after the fact to get all your shapes, your designs, all of that how you want it, instead of having to stress if you've made it too thin or not. As you can see, I'm slightly angling my bowl gouge with the direction that I'm cutting, as well as moving my whole body with the chisel instead of just my hands. It means that you're more locked in when you are turning, as well as you're less likely to feel the vibrations of the lathe, of the tool rest, and of the material if you're just moving your hands along the tool rest. As you can see, now what I'm doing is turning the shapes that I want for my pens. So I start with doing the very rough shaping, making a very long bead on the back end, and on the front end I make a very sharp drop off with a very tapered edge down to the writing tip. I find this is the most comfortable feeling pen that I make, as well as it feels nice and weighted. But some people have all different types of styles. People make tiny coves and beads throughout the entirety of their pen. Some people make them just dead straight, and that's totally up to personal preference. It's totally what you decide to do when it comes to turning. Some of the major things that you really want to be focusing on is, especially when you're beginning out, is your technique and not rushing it. Now, I can, after turning a lot of pens, make a full pen from start to finish in about 15 minutes. When I first started, it took me, I'd say about half an hour to 45 minutes to make a pen, and I would say they're not even great pens anymore. I think it all comes down to making sure that you at least know your technique and you get a feel for the lathe. That's why these projects are so good, because you're getting a feel for a lathe on not only a very easy project to make, it's a very cheap project to get into, but if something goes wrong on the lathe, like if the pen breaks, it's not like you're having a huge bowl blank being thrown at your head. You're getting a little chip of wood probably hitting your chest, worst case. So that's why I really like to start out with these pen kits, mandrel kits, whatever you want to call them, more than just getting straight into bowls. Everyone wants to get straight into bowls, and that's a good thing to start with when you get a little bit more skill under your belt and you get a feel for how all the different chisels work. I'm sort of moving into the use of a skew chisel now, just really flattening out all my curves, my straight edges, my taper, all that type of stuff. Now, this specific one is very chattery compared to what it usually is. Maybe my skew chisel isn't as sharp as it should be. Maybe I should have sharpened it. But all I'm doing with this is not only getting the shape nice and refined, but also getting the ends of the blanks very close, if not to the bushings. Because when you start sanding, you're then going to have to basically make sure that the blank is touching the bushings. And within this project, I'm going to be using a couple different grits. I'm using 120, that's a very rough grit. Then going to 320 and then 400. This material is very easy to sand, and you'll also see me every time in between sanding grits stop the lathe and sand with the grain. I find this the easiest way to not have to overuse the sandpaper and have to go like really small increments in grits. I can go much wider increments in grits and not have the problem. Most of the time I'll also be sanding at a very high speed, very much like I'm turning, but also I'll be moving my hands very quickly. You don't see me stopping on a specific point for too long. There's a couple reasons. One, you don't want to dig a hole into your pen, but you also don't want to leave burn marks, or you don't want it to catch, and you basically don't want it to deform the pen, because at the point of sanding, you should basically be done. You shouldn't really be changing how you're really moving it around. Now, the finish I'm using in this project is a friction wax from an Australian finish maker, as well as some beeswax. I find this just a very simple finish to use, and basically I just turn the lathe up to as fast as I can go. I put a tiny bit of friction wax on. This stuff lasts me years, and I basically just get it all on, buff it in, then I put a little bit of beeswax on, and same again, buff it in, and then as I'm stopping the lathe, I'm gonna just really rub my hand back and forth. It'll stop any residue being built up. It'll make the final feel really nice and really, for a better word, supple. And then it also just allows the grain to really pop and allows you to really see the grain of the timber. Plus, the finish smells fantastic. So if you don't have very aromatic timber, the finish is going to smell fantastic. But that's kind of the entire turning process and the finishing process that I use. If there's any time left in this turning, just sit back and enjoy some nice simple finishing. And right at the end, I'll show you what the pen actually looks like on the mandrel, nice and finished.
So we've just finished turning the pen. The last bit of gear that you're going to need is a way to assemble it. There's this thing, it's called a pen assembly thing. But now you take the rest of your kit out that you got. So, let's first talk about what I turned and why I turned it. So there's two different, they look different, and there's a reason for that. This one, I turn for the front, so it tapers down nicely for your pen grip. And then this one for the back, it just makes it flow a little bit better with another bead. So that's kind of my standard way of turning pens. A lot of people turn them perfectly flat. I'm not a huge proponent of liking that, but each to their own. So let's sort of figure out how this all goes together. So most of the time, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be doing a couple smaller assemblies followed by one sort of final assembly. So for this one, let's lock it in there. I'm assembling the back where the clip goes. Oh, I didn't tighten this enough. And that. So this one, that's kind of how that first piece goes together. And when it's all said and done, this little gold piece, whoop, I just threw, will go in there. And that's the clickiness of it. So that's done. Let's actually do this one next. So expand it a little bit and then close it in. And there's the center bit. So the final bit will be me pressing that together. But let's first figure out this. Okay. So that doesn't feel right. Or does that? That screws into there. Okay. So on this piece, it's really small. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. There's two sides. This side has a slight step down on it, and that's the side that we're going to put into here. So I'm going to grab the bit, and in it goes. Now, I'm going to pop everything together. I'm going to have to expand my thing a little bit. Maybe too much. Just pop it there. And then we're going to press it together. Hopefully. There we go. So, one thing that you want to be careful of when you are using this is the piece isn't skewy in it, because it can bend the internal tubing a bit and basically make the pens fall apart. So that's now done with the mandrel. Now we're going to pop that one all the way through. We're going to pop that on. So there we go. Technically the pen should work now, and now we just slip on the back and it clicks. There we go. And that's a pencil made. Now the internal leads are broken a little bit through all the messing around, but let me bring it up and get it in focus. And hold and push back. So there you go. Again, let me get focus. Here's what that final pen looks like. There you have it. We have turned a pen. Hopefully, this video has inspired you to really get into the world of wood turning. There are so many things that you can do on the lathe that it is a worthwhile investment. Even if you are just a regular woodworker, there's things that you can do on it that just increases your scope as a woodworker. But if you guys have anything that you would like to add in the comments, please do. If you think I deserve it, please drop a subscribe on the channel, as it does really help me out, and my goal is to hit 100 subscribers. We are very close, so let's try and push that over the edge. Other than that, I really hope you guys enjoyed, and drop a like if you did. I can't wait to see you in the next one, and until next time, see ya.